When you think of World War I, you probably picture muddy trenches, maybe machine guns, but the fight to control the oceans was just as deadly.
And, in the end, maybe even more decisive. We're going to look at a revolution in naval warfare and one single event that really changed history.
A single ship sinking.
Exactly. But to get there, you need to understand the situation in 1914. Great Britain was, without a doubt, the king of the seas.
The Royal Navy.
They had the world's biggest and most powerful fleet of battleships. Germany knew they couldn't possibly win a head-to-head fight like that. They needed a clever alternative.
Something to level the playing field.
Yeah.
And that equalizer was something new and, frankly, terrifying.
It was the undersea boat,
The U-boat.
the submarine.
Right. And it was revolutionary for one simple reason. Invisibility. It could move, it could attack, all while hidden completely beneath the waves. It just turned centuries of naval strategy on its head.
So if it couldn't fight those huge British battleships, what was its actual mission? What was the goal? The mission was strategic starvation. Plain and simple. They weren't hunting military ships.
They were hunting merchant vessels.
Yes. You have to think of these ships as floating supply lines. They're carrying everything Britain needs to survive. Food, fuel, raw materials, weapons for the army in France.
So the U-boat's job was to cut that line.
Cut the line, starve the economy, and force Britain to surrender. All without a single German soldier ever setting foot on British soil.
That sounds like a tough job. I mean, what was life actually like for those sailors inside an early U-boat?
Oh, it was intensely miserable. These things were basically just metal tubes. You know, maybe the length of 2 school buses, but so much narrower.
And packed with machinery.
Packed with machinery, the air got stale and foul almost immediately, and the smell. Oil, fuel, unwashed bodies. They lived like that for weeks. It took incredible discipline just to survive the journey.
And yet, even with those terrible conditions, they were incredibly effective, at least at the start of the war.
They were. And it all goes back to that one advantage. Invisibility. Britain just had no defense against an enemy they couldn't see coming.
Okay, so this is where it gets really complicated because there were rules for war at sea. A kind of, well, a code of honor.
The prize rules. That's a great way to put it. Under international law, if you were going to sink civilian merchant ship, you had to surface first.
Give a warning.
You had to fire a warning shot, let the crew get away safely in their lifeboats, and then you could sink the ship. The idea was to separate the military target, the cargo, from the civilian crew.
But for a submarine, following that rule was a huge problem.
It was an impossible dilemma. The moment a U-boat surfaced to give a warning, it gave up its only advantage. It became this big, slow target on the surface.
Completely defenseless.
Exactly. Any British warship nearby could just race in and destroy it. So German captains were being asked to risk everything, their lives, their expensive U-boat, just to follow a rule that was made for surface ships.
And the British, realizing this vulnerability, came up with a pretty deceptive countermove.
Oh, it's a stroke of genius. Or, really dirty trick, depending on your perspective.
Yeah.
They created the Q ships.
What exactly was a Q ship?
Imagine a heavily armed warship, but it's been disguised to look like a slow, harmless, rusty, old merchant vessel. They'd put fake cargo on the deck, have a few sailors dressed like civilians just lounging around.
They were bait.
Pure bait. So the German U-boat, trying to follow the rules, would surface to warn this merchant ship.
And then the trap would spring.
The Q ship would wait until the U-boat was totally exposed, then bang! Hidden panels would drop, revealing massive guns, and they would just open fire.
And it worked.
It was devastatingly effective at first. It sank several U-boats, but what it really did was escalate the situation. German commanders felt like they were being punished for trying to follow the rules.
They felt tricked.
They felt they were in an impossible position, either follow the rules and get destroyed, or abandon the rules completely.
Which is exactly what they did. In February 1915, Germany made a huge announcement. They declared the waters around Great Britain a total war zone.
This was the point of no return. They officially began a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare.
Which meant what, exactly?
It meant the U-boats would no longer surface, no more warnings. They would torpedo and sink any ship they found in that zone. Enemy, neutral, civilian, it didn't matter. Total war at sea.
And how did they justify that? I mean, to the rest of the world?
Their argument was that Britain started it. They pointed to the massive British naval blockade that was trying to starve the entire German population.
So it was retaliation.
It was. They basically said, if you're going to try and starve our people, we have the right to do the same to you.
But the global reaction was outrage. especially from neutral countries like the United States.
Absolute outrage, because this policy targeted civilians. Sinking a ship without warning was seen as a violation of basic human rights. It really shifted the war from a fight between armies to a war against entire populations.
And that brings us to the single event that focused all of that global anger.
The sinking of the RMS Lusitania.
This wasn't just any ship.
No, the Lusitania was a celebrity. It was one of the biggest, fastest, most luxurious ocean liners in the world. It ran the route between New York and Liverpool. People thought it was just too big and too fast to ever be attacked.
But the Germans did issue a warning, didn't they?
They did. It was a pretty unusual step. They actually published a warning in American newspapers right next to the sailing schedule for the Lusitania.
What did it say?
It reminded travelers that Britain was a war zone and that anyone sailing on a British ship was doing so at their own risk. But, most people just ignored it. They thought it was a bluff.
And on May 7th, 1915, they found out it wasn't.
A German U-boat, the U-20, spotted the liner off the coast of Ireland. The captain fired a single torpedo. It hit the side, and there was a huge explosion. But then, moments later,
There was another one.
a second, much, much larger explosion deep inside the ship. And that second blast is what doomed it.
How fast did it sink?
Just 18 minutes. It's almost impossible to imagine a ship that huge going down that quickly. The chaos must have been unbelievable. The ship tilted so fast they couldn't launch most of the lifeboats properly.
And the loss of life was just staggering.
Over 1,100 people died, men, women, children. And critically, 128 of them were American citizens. That's the number that really changed everything.
The diplomatic crisis was immediate.
Oh, absolutely. The outcry was massive. People in Britain and the U.S. called it a cowardly attack, an act of barbarism. There were even riots in some cities targeting German businesses.
And Germany tried to defend its actions by saying the ship was carrying military supplies. Did that argument work?
Not at all. I mean, nobody was listening. The image of all those civilians, those women and children drowned at sea, it just made it impossible for the world to accept any excuse. It was a total public relations disaster for Germany.
So with 128 Americans dead, the pressure on President Wilson in the U.S. was immense.
It was. The U.S. wasn't in the war yet, but this brought it right to the brink. Wilson sent very stern notes to Germany. He demanded an end to attacks on passenger ships.
He made it clear this couldn't happen again.
He did. And the pressure worked. Germany was terrified of the U.S. entering the war. They knew America's industrial power could tip the scales, so they agreed to scale back the unrestricted warfare policy, at least for a while.
Okay, but let's go back to that German claim about the cargo. For decades, people debated it. Was the Lusitania actually carrying weapons?
And this is where the story gets even more complicated. Recent expeditions to the wreck have confirmed it. The Germans were, well, they were partially right.
So it was carrying military supplies?
Yes. Several million rounds of rifle ammunition were found in the cargo hold.
And that could explain the mysterious second explosion.
That's the leading theory now, that the torpedo hit and the initial blast then detonated all of that ammunition, causing the second catastrophic explosion that sank the ship so fast.
Which shows how both sides were using information as a weapon.
Absolutely. The British denied it to maximize the outrage. The Germans emphasized it to justify their actions. Both were manipulating the truth for propaganda.
So after this temporary pause, the war continues to grind on, and by 1917, the German military decides to make one final, desperate gamble.
A huge gamble. They decided to restart full, unrestricted submarine warfare. They knew it would bring the United States into the war. They were certain of it.
So why do it?
It was a race against time. Their calculation was that they could sink enough ships to starve Britain into surrender in 6 months before the American army could really mobilize and arrive in Europe.
And at first, the gamble seemed to be working.
Horrifyingly so.
Uh-huh.
Thousands of merchant ships were sunk. Britain was losing supplies so quickly that at one point they were down to just 6 weeks of food left. They were on the verge of collapsing.
So the Allies had to innovate and fast. What was their main answer to this?
Their most effective new tactic was the convoy system.
Which meant what?
Instead of ships sailing alone, they would travel in large protected groups convoys. They were escorted by fast warships, destroyers, which were armed to the teeth. So now, if a U-boat wanted to attack one ship, it had to face an entire pack of hunters.
But they still had to find the submarine first. That was always the problem.
Right. So new technology was key. First, they developed hydrophones.
Underwater microphone.
Exactly. They could listen for the faint sound of a U-boat's engines.
Right.
Once they had a general location, they would use the depth charge.
Which sounds terrifying.
It was. A huge barrel bomb dropped into the ocean, set to explode at a certain depth. The shockwave alone could be enough to crack a U-boat's hull open.
And even aircraft got involved.
Yes, from the air, a pilot could often spot the dark shadow of a submarine under the surface and radio its position to the destroyers.
So the convoys, the hydrophones, the depth charges, it all worked together.
It completely turned the tables. It made being a U-boat sailor one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. The number of sinkings dropped, and the German gamble failed.
When you look back, the U-boat campaign, and especially the Lusitania, were these pivotal moments. They turned world opinion and gave the U.S. the reason it needed to join the war.
And that contribution of American soldiers and resources was ultimately what the Allies needed to win. It really shows how a new piece of technology can just shatter old rules of war and change history forever.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Knowing now that the Lusitania was, in fact, carrying military ammunition, does that change how you see the tragedy? Does it change the political power of an event that helped pull the world into war?
Something to think about.
Good luck with your studies.